Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
So the big news this week, well, there's two things. Number one, the student loan program is in catastrophic failure, but that's been true for a while. But finally, after 6 years of us shouting from the rooftops about the very simple, easily proven fact that older people outnumber younger people with student loans, finally, this past week, or actually the week before, we were able to get the Associated Press did a feature story on that, and the Independent out of the United Kingdom, they actually reported the simple fact, that older people outnumber younger people with student loans by a lot. So it's been true since 2020, and the mainstream media up to this point has just absolutely and suspiciously ignored that fact. But now it's finally at least registered in the mainstream media zeitgeist, and it will be very hard to unring that bell. And hopefully it will just be a matter of months when the general public hopefully will finally be aware of that very simple fact that really changes the entire narrative around student loans. You know, we see look at all these young and liberal, that's also not true, but look at all these young kids, blah, 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 irresponsible, avocado toast, blah, blah, blah. That's always been used against us. Well, now they can no longer say that. This is far more an older person's problem than a younger person's problem.
Yeah.
And so the Associated Press headline also spawned dozens of local media, television, radio, newspaper stories about that. And I'm glad to say that our members are featured in all of those pieces. So
yeah,
a bit of a feather in our cap.
that's great. It reminds me of the interview I did with Tom Borgers, actually, who, as you know, just wrote a book. He just wrote a book about this very thing with regards to Parent Plus loans. For those of you out there who are Parent Plus loan borrowers,
You're exactly right.
the majority of Parent Plus loan borrowers are over the age of 50. Um,
Yeah.
and it was really, um, I don't know even what the word is, sad, shocking to find out.
Well, it's a multi-generational thing. And I should add that it's not the Parent Plus loan borrowers who make that statistic that I said just a minute ago true about older people. Older people would still outnumber younger people of just taking the loans out for themselves.
Yeah.
But these Parent Plus loans are the dagger in the heart for a lot of people. They are. It is just the most poisonous thing that you can imagine doing to a country, putting people in student loan debt, and then they have kids, and then they have to take out far more for their kids.
Yeah.
And remember, these loans, there's no bankruptcy protections. There's no statutes of limitations. So these debts are inescapable and immortal and extraordinarily predatory. So some of the saddest stories that I see are from Parent Plus loan borrowers who, up until very recently, they were allowed to borrow up to the full cost of attendance, which could be $90,000 a year in some cases. So and there's no credit check or anything. And most of these parents are below the average median annual income line. They have to prove they're financially needy to even get the loans in the first place. So this is just, it's like the nation is, I should say, our federal government is concertedly trying to ruin the people of this country in debt. And these Parent Plus loans are the tip of that spear, I would say.
It's hard to argue against that. I think when you look at all of the data, whether that data is accurately reported or not, I think it's inaccurately reported for the most part.
I agree with you. I think we owe a lot more than the government is showing. I think people's loan balances are, on average, way more than $40,000.
Yeah, including by the Department of Education, by the way.
Yes, exactly right. I think the Department of Education is not counting a ton of interest that accrues on defaulted loans, for example. And I had proven that in 2010 I'm having a hard time reproving that now today, but I really don't. I really still think they are not reporting interest on defaulted loans. So that's got to be another $500 billion at least that is saddled on the back of this country.
Yeah, and I feel like all of the harm, with regards to the borrowers who are over, whether they're Parent Plus loan or students, because let's keep in mind, right? Like, you know, people of our parents' generation went to college. I mean, they went to college back in the 80s and the 90s, and they borrowed money. And, they're well into their 70s and 80s. And, you know, so here we have this situation and the harm that's being done to them, which I think people don't really understand unless they start to go down the rabbit hole, and you're like one of the doors into that rabbit hole. There are other people who I'm sure, others are paying attention to, but when they go down that rabbit hole, they find out, oh, hey, this is actually really bad for not only these people, but the entire country, the
Really
entire
bad.
economy, the entire economy.
Right. I've got everything. Most states, the people of those states owe more than the entire state budget in student loan debt.
Yeah.
And in most states, just the interest that the Department of Education is sucking out of those states rivals or even exceeds major industries of those states.
Mhm.
Like all the lobsters farmed in Maine, the Department of Education takes more interest out of the state of Maine than all the lobsters bring into the state in revenue. Florida and Disney World, the Department of Education takes more interest out of the state of Florida than Disney World brings in revenue. And I could go on and on. One more example. There are almost every state that I've looked at. In fact, in every state that I've looked at, the Department of Education takes far more interest out of those states than all of the major professional sports franchises bring in. So like California, there's like 16 professional teams from the Lakers to the Knicks to the Raiders, or not the Raiders anymore, but just all the teams. New York, same thing. All those revenues that all those professional teams bring in, which is, hundreds of millions or even billions per year, Department of Education takes more interest out of the states than all of those teams combined. So you kind of start to understand just how big this problem actually is.
Yeah.
I've got one more little factoid that I'd like to put to you if I could share my screen.
Yeah.
Um, let me show you my.
Can I make a peanut gallery comment on all of
Yeah.
this? And this is really focused on everybody, but since we're kind of, zooming in on the over 50 crowd today, uh, especially the over 50 crowd, the majority of our generation and previous generations never, under any circumstances, in most cases, right? This is not to say that it's in all cases because it depends where you went to school. So if you went to private elementary school, primary school, middle school, high school, you may have gotten some kind of training in personal finance, right? But really, for the most part, this whole situation is exacerbated by the fact that, there's such a large swath of people, including the current generation, who never got any kind of training. They never got any kind of classes. They don't, most parents, unless you're coming from a wealthy family where your father or your mother is sitting down with you, or maybe your uncle or whoever is sitting down with you on a private one-on-one basis and talking to you and teaching you about, let's say retail trading and day trading or
Right.
long-term investing.
Yeah.
No one, for the most part, is really getting an education in personal finance.
Well, I agree. Obviously, that's true. But, Jessica, and I hear a lot of guys who are selling financial literacy uh, tell that same line. But you know what? Most parents, 90%, 99%, well, every parent who hasn't been wrecked by these student loans, they have no idea that unlike every other loan in this country, student loans have been uniquely stripped of bankruptcy rights, uniquely stripped of statutes of limitations, uniquely stripped of truth in lending laws, of fair debt collection laws. The parents are never told, even in loan counseling. They are the fact that those very fundamental, even constitutional in the case of bankruptcy protections, are stripped from the loans. That is never disclosed, not to the students, not to their parents, not to anyone. And they never find that out until later. So financial literacy, yeah, that's something. But, no amount of financial literacy fixes this problem, because it is the very absence of these bankruptcy rights, the absence of statutes of limitations, the absence of all these consumer protections that have weaponized these loans and turned them into licenses to steal. Now, whether you tell the kid before he signs for the loans that they are poisonous loans or not, the kid's probably still going to sign, because that's just what kids do. They want to go to college. They want to get registered. So, you can throw all the financial literacy courses at a kid that you can think of, and it doesn't solve the problem. The loans will still, by and large, be signed for, and the kids and their parents will still be wrecked.
And I'm just going to add one more thing. As a teacher, which I am, I had to teach something along the lines of personal finance. I don't want to really call it that, because I feel like that's an injustice to the. It was a curriculum that was developed, and it's meant to be taught to fifth graders to all the way, I think, to eighth grade and beyond. But I don't, this would be something for someone to look into. I don't know if this is happening in multiple states, or if it's just the state that I'm in, but there is something that we were charged with teaching. And as I was teaching it to my students last year, I noted that they taught them all about FAFSA. They taught them, here's what you can do to, if you want to go to college, you can start thinking about, they said, borrowing from FAFSA. And they did not, in any of that literature, because they give us a little book, and they give each student a book. In all of those books, never once did they ever mention the lack of consumer protections on these loans.
That's exactly right.
You know what I mean? Like, so at what point do we sit back and say, again, I know I sound conspiratorial, but I'm going to say it again, how much intentionality is behind this?
Exactly. You're exactly right. And, you and me and a woman named Catherine Austin Fitz could not agree more. In fact, I'm writing an article, hopefully it will be published, with Solari.com. Catherine was a former board member of Sallie Mae back when they first started concocting their schemes to get bankruptcy taken away, statutes of limitations, all those protections. She calls it a fraudulent inducement, and I agree 1,000%. That's a legal term, fraudulent inducement.
Yeah.
It's one of the many avenues of legal recourse that people have against scam artists, con artists. So, if somebody sells you a car and they don't tell you that the car has no brakes, or maybe they tell you that the car is great and has brakes and it doesn't have brakes, well, that's a fraudulent inducement to get you to buy the car.
Yeah.
It is actionable in civil court, but when the federal government is the one committing the fraudulent inducement, it becomes much more difficult. Here's a fun.
And we have to start asking the harder questions, right?
Well, you have to start talking about racketeering and federal RICO statutes, and it's very hard to sue the federal government. And everybody that I've seen try has not gone very well for them. I'll just say. A guy I don't know, but one guy tried to sue the Department of Education over his loans, and he literally lost his mind, declared war on the federal government, committed murder. It was just too crazy to talk about, but let me just say you probably don't want to be suing the federal government.
Right. I think Tom Borgers would agree with the fraudulent inducement thing, because
I'm sure he would. Tom has, and to his credit, and I hope everybody will go to, it's called Publishizer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a play on publish, IZER, and just search for Tom Borgers, BORGERS. if you have Parent Plus loans, you really want to know about all the fraud that Tom has uncovered.
Yeah.
He's a former federal investigator and prosecutor. He has gotten all kinds of guilty convictions on fraud in the past, and he may be onto something. I think everybody with Parent Plus loans definitely needs to check him out.
Presidentially appointed, by the way.
That's right. And in fact,
Yeah.
like me, he is a alum of 60 Minutes. So
Yeah.
he was featured on 60 Minutes. He was one of the if not the chief investigator into the subprime home mortgage crisis of
Yeah.
2000 odds.
Yep.
But yeah, there's fraud everywhere. This thing is a fraudulent inducement. Everybody knows it.
Yep.
And here's a fun graph. Hopefully, I'm sharing my screen so you can see this.
Yeah.
This shows just how big the Department of Education has become. So back in 1990, it was like barely a blip on the radar with its student loan portfolio, compared to all the biggest banks in this country, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. You can see how the Department of Education and its federal student loan program has come to overwhelm and exceed the portfolio size of all those banks I just mentioned. And I mean, JP Morgan Chase is a behemoth of a bank. A lot of people say they built this country, and in many ways, that's very true. Um, and they do home loans, they do business loans, they do farm loans, they do um, credit cards, they do every business loan, stock equity loans, every kind of loan that you can imagine. JP Morgan Chase is one of the dominant players in, except for student loans, though, believe it or not. But yeah, the Department of Education, just with that one loan category, student loans, the Department of Education has overwhelmed all of the other huge behemoth banks in this country.
Yeah.
So that kind of puts things in a perspective that people need to be aware of. This is not a small stovepiped off problem. This is, in my view, very, very much larger, far and away larger than the subprime home mortgage crisis.
Yeah.
The default rate, the foreclosure rate on subprimes was something like 20%. We're headed for 50% on federal student loans. We're already at about 30% of everybody out of school has defaulted on their loans. But based on all the data that I've seen, and that's maybe another quick graph I will share with you. We're headed towards probably 50% default rate. And
Yeah.
that is just the craziest thing in the world.
It is. And I think, a lot of borrowers don't understand what happens if that happens.
Yeah, default sucks.
And I think a lot of people, there are people out there, and I'm not trying to excuse anyone, but there are people out there who are so busy, right? So they have families, they have multiple jobs, they have
Or
obligations,
they're in the military on deployment.
or they're on deployment and they lose track, right? If you're in the military on deployment, you're not sitting in your bunk like thinking about calling Sally Mae or Mohila, right?
Right.
You're thinking about your life and
Right.
you know what I mean? So
And everything. If you're a young mother, the last thing that you're probably thinking about is your student loans. If
yeah,
you're pretty much anyone, I mean, everybody's got a life to lead, and student loans should not be. We should not have to devote, a huge amount of attention to these loans. They should be easy. They should be fair loans. They shouldn't be minefields.
yeah,
The student loan industry can make far excuse me, they can make far more money on a defaulted loan than one that remains in good stead.
right.
So, and we're seeing from borrowers everywhere, people are losing their minds right now that these loans are turned back on. They're getting misinformation. They're hearing one thing one day and completely different thing the next day. They're getting these threatening letters saying that they're in default and they never even knew that they were delinquent in the first place. This is a predatory rat trap. And the Department of Education and its contractors have honed the art of baffling and bamboozling borrowers into default, into a thing of exquisite beauty.
Let me ask you something quickly, and this is mostly for the people who have not seen any of our episodes before. So if someone goes into default, you just said something that they may find interesting. You said if a student loan borrower goes into default, was it the collections industry or the government? Who is it exactly that's actually making more money if they default?
Well, it's certainly the collection industry. It's this, and today that is mostly the servicers.
Right.
So what happens is when a loan defaults, huge collection costs are put onto the loans, up to 18.5% in some cases. Used to be like 25%, but it's actually up to 40% if you include Perkins loans. But nearly 20% in collection costs are added to the loans. And then, of course, interest can be capitalized into the principal. What they do is they try and con you, compel you. They'll say, oh, your loan's in default. The only thing that you can do is consolidate or rehabilitate your loans. Well, either of those things usually bakes in those collection costs into the new loan. So if you default on a $50,000 loan, then interest accrues, and finally, after 10 months, you get it taken care of. Well, all of a sudden, your loan is 80, 90, maybe even $100,000. I mean, we see people with doubled rehabilitated loans. I say rehabilitated, but they're not rehabilitated at all.
No.
All it is signing for a much larger loan
Right.
where all those collection costs can be baked into the new note.
And
And
the collectors, the collection agencies, you said are making somewhere around 16,000 on each rehabilitated loan.
well, I mean, yeah, a notional example would be, and it's a little unclear. This is true for the older style loans. In more recent years, it's very hard to pin down how much exactly these services are making. But I know for a fact that the collection rate is still sitting at 18.5% for when you consolidate your loans out of default,
Mhm.
and it's still at 16% when you rehabilitate your loans out of default.
So,
Now,
yeah,
the
go ahead.
most important point I need to make here is that 80% of the time, people who rehabilitate their loans out of default wind up defaulting again. So it's like playing Russian roulette with 5 out of the 6 bullet chambers of the gun loaded with bullets. You don't want to play that game. That's not a game that you want to play.
No.
And there's functionally no difference between rehabilitated loans and loans that are consolidated out of default, not functionally. So the redefault rate for these consolidated defaulted loans has got to be the same or nearly the same. So
So,
the
so let's just do a quick experiment. So, like, let's say for one borrower who defaults one time, the collection agency gets, an extra what, let's say just hypothetically 10,000
so here's some very simple math. You default on a loan at $50,000. All the interest, all the collection costs get piled onto the loan. Eventually, you finally go through loan rehabilitation, right? You pay for 9 or 10 months, and then they make you sign for a new, much larger loan. It could be $100,000. It's just for simplicity. Let's say you sign for a new $100,000 loan. 16% of that, $16,000, is the collection cost that is charged onto the loan. Now, certainly for the older style FFELP loans, that money was paid to whoever got you to do that rehabilitation in
Right.
cash, $16,000 check from the government. So if you're a servicer, would you rather be paid like $5 or $10 a month for a healthy account? Or would you rather that account go into default and then after a couple, 3 years or whatever, you get paid $16,000? Like, would you rather make, what is that? That's like 120 a year for 3 years. That's like, would you rather make $360 in 3 years? Or would you rather make $16,000 after 3 years on a defaulted account? Well, obviously, it is far more lucrative to want that loan to default. And, we've seen companies like Sallie Mae, they've been caught, they've been busted for purposely defaulting thousands, tens of thousands maybe of people's loans without even attempting to contact the borrower. So they would submit these false claims to the government. They paid 3 million, 6 million. They paid millions in fines to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston in 2000. So they were defaulting these people's loans without even attempting to contact them. But then they would lie and say, yeah, we tried to contact these borrowers, but they defaulted. So now, pay us. And so these are the sorts of perverted, perverse, just disgusting, painful, just massively harmful predatory behaviors that we have seen the student loan industry engaged in. Mm-hmm. It was true in 2000, and we are seeing all the same shenanigans today. They are the student loan industry loves defaulted loans. The student loan collection industry absolutely loves. They would not even exist as an industry if there were no defaulted student loans. So this is the perverted, dystopian, dysfunctional, weaponized loan scam that the founding fathers wanted to avoid when they gave us uniform bankruptcy rights in the Constitution.
I just want to add really quick. So this is an over-exaggeration because we know that all of the 45 million borrowers are not going to default on their loans, but a large proportion of them are and already have. But let's say, hypothetically, all of them default one time and $16,000 goes to each collection agency for each of those 45 million borrowers' defaulted loans. That is a total of $720 billion.
It's insane, isn't it? And if you wonder why the student loan portfolio has exploded since 1998, this is exactly why. And as I said, a lot of that interest isn't even reported, but the numbers are astonishing.
And let's say only 50% of borrowers default twice. That still comes out to $720 billion.
Well, here's the thing. The one big beautiful bill. See, for the longest time, by law, a defaulted loan could only be rehabilitated one time. And then after that, you're just whatever. Only one time allowed. The one big beautiful bill that was passed last year had language snuck into it, and nobody ever reports this fact, but it's probably the most pernicious part of the one big beautiful bill. The bill allows for loans to be rehabilitated twice. So imagine defaulting on a $50,000 loan. You sign for a $100,000 loan in the first rehabilitation. You default on that, and then you rehabilitate that again. Well, you're going to sign for a $200,000 loan, and that is potentially a $32,000 check from the government to whoever gets you to do the loan rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So we are talking very serious money. Yep. And we are talking about a very strong, perverted incentive
to
want
strong.
To keep loans in
Yeah. Oh my God.
And by the way, we're off a default cliff, the likes of which we've never seen before in this country. We added just last quarter, 1.5 million defaults for a total of 9.5 million defaults in total. But, as I said, I think there's quite a few more than that they aren't reporting, but whatever. Even what we can prove, we're going to be at 11 or 12, probably closer to 12 million defaults by September 10th. That's like just a little over a month away. And there's no telling how high this could go. I could easily see it going to 50%.
Oh, I mean, with the economy the way it is, with the job market the way it is, with the inflation the way it is, people need to start putting the pieces together and doing the fucking math. Excuse my language, but economists need to pull their heads out of their asses and start looking at this in a critical way. You can't just brush this over and think, oh, well, there's a collection industry that's going to take care of it all. No, it's not. And the Department of Education is corrupted. I'm sorry.
Well, the whole thing is just one huge failed loan scam. Loan scams fail from time to time. And to everybody out there who's in default or about to go into default, I can never tell people to default on their loans. Just ethically, I can't do it. That's what the fake groups do who are in bed with the student loan industry. Default sucks. You don't want to go there. So it's tricky. I would love to tell everybody to stop paying on their loans, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't really matter what I say, because right now, 77% of all borrowers are not making payments on their loans. And
Yeah.
that's increasing quarter over quarter.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it could go to 100%. I mean, we could reach a critical mass where
So
not anybody pays on their loans. I don't know.
So there are groups, as you just said. I want to touch on this briefly. There are groups out there who are, calling themselves, various monikers and whatnot, having to do with debt and student loan debt and whatnot.
Cancel student loans. Yeah,
They will,
debt
they will,
collective and student debt crisis and any number of fake groups.
they will say, and I've seen it on certain occasions, just stop paying your loans, right? So now let's be clear about that. That only works for one industry. That doesn't work for the borrower.
Hey, if you have bankruptcy protections or if you have statutes of limitations and you just can't pay, don't pay, and they will have to sit down with you and negotiate a fair and reasonable settlement. Otherwise, you'll file for bankruptcy. Student loans, you don't have any of that power like every other borrower has. And so you get these groups like the Debt Collective. They've been calling for a debt strike their whole existence, and they've been behind the scenes. They've been fighting against the return of bankruptcy protections to the loans. And lo and behold, the Debt Collective just happens to be business partners with the student debt collection industry. So this is exactly what the debt collection industry wants. They want a mass default on student loans in the continued absence of both bankruptcy protections and statutes of limitations, because then we can't run, we can't hide, and they can suck the life out of us. And that's exactly what they're trying to do right now. So we're in a very bad spot. But I can just tell people, and hopefully you can see my graph. Yeah. And 77% of everybody isn't paying, and some of them are on deferment or deferment forbearance. Some of them are making $0 payments. But as you can see, with like 30% now in default, I would just tell people out there, don't be hard on yourself. We're seeing a lot of suicides and people just generally losing their minds right now, and that's completely understandable. But don't take it too seriously. I mean, this is a national joke, and everybody in Washington, D.C. knows what I know. Look at the data right down there. You can see the loans it's a national joke. Lending systems fail from time to time. Don't let yourself be harassed and intimidated and coerced into signing anything, into paying anything. Like, take a step back. Lending systems fail from time to time, and I cannot tell anybody to default on their loans on purpose, because that's exactly what the industry wants. But what I do say, Jessica, and again, it's so tricky because of what we just said. What I do tell people is anything that you can do to not feed your money into this beast. So maybe that means have a no reportable income and be on a repayment plan. I don't know. I don't like to give advice, period, because really there is no good advice to give. But in general, feeding your money into this loan beast and keeping it alive so it can wreck the next generation of borrowers, that just rubs me the wrong way on every level.
Well, if you're a borrower out there, whether you're Parent Plus loan, whether you're over 50 or under 50, whether you're a regular borrower or not, if you are struggling, get in contact with one of us. You can reach out to me, radfuturesnow@gmail.com. You can reach out to Alan at studentloanjustice.org. Also, keep in mind, instead of defaulting, because that's going to, there's no easy solution here, right? But I think that the most feasible and the best solution at this point in the game is to fight. You have to fight. You have
Amen.
to. You can't
exactly.
You cannot just sit there. And I'm sorry, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you identify with politically. Both parties are complicit in this.
Totally agree.
Both parties.
I would also, just to finish that point, When we get the leverage of bankruptcy back, guys, no matter whether you would ever, nobody has to file, but just having the threat of bankruptcy back on our side, they're going to have to cancel loans. They're going to have to knock off interest. They're going to have to lower interest rates. They're going to have to approve the BDR applications out there. They're going to have to run the various income-driven payment plans in such a way as that most people make it through rather than 90+% of the people getting kicked out. There's a million different things. They're going to have to cancel huge swaths of the debt because all the big banks, the JP Morgan Chases, they're going to demand it. Because think about it, the big banks don't want a big wave of bankruptcy filings on student loans because those people who file, they're going to bring their credit cards and their auto loans or whatever other debt they have. They're going to bring those loans into their filings.
Yeah.
And that would be a huge, big deal for the banks. So all the big banks are going to come to our side when we get the leverage of bankruptcy return.
Yeah.
So whether you would ever or never file, your time, the most efficient, effective use of your time is fighting for bankruptcy. I would love to fight for cancellation again, but we saw how we started the fight for cancellation in 2020. That's not going to go anywhere right now. It's just not in the current politics with Trump and the Republicans controlling the government. And honestly, I really don't even see that as much of a starter if the Democrats are back in power, because the Democrats are against us. They don't want to cancel loans by executive order. They don't want to cancel loans. They love this lending program. The Democrats are far friendlier sounding, and it's true that they did cancel way more loans through the income-driven repayment plans than Trump ever would or will. That's true. But at the end of the day, the Democrats, their fealty is to the Department of Education and the colleges over the people. So when we get and there's a very good chance that we can get bankruptcy done. It's a big bipartisan push for it. When we get that little toothpick of power back on our side, we can wield it like a fucking broadsword, pardon my French,